were cast out with him. Satan was cast out of heaven. There's no more place found there for Satan and his angels. They rebelled against the government of God. They were cast out of heaven. And in verse 12 of Revelation 12, it goes on and says, "Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time." Here we find Satan, his angels, cast out of heaven. And he continues the rebellion against the government of God. He continues that rebellion against the government of God down here on this earth. And people will often say, well, why didn't God just do away with Satan? And that's a good question, isn't it? Why didn't God, if he's almighty, if he's all-powerful, which he is, if he is the creator of Satan himself, who was once Lucifer, who became Satan and the devil, why didn't God just go poof and there's no more devil, there's no more Satan, there's no more temptation and suffering and pain on this earth? If God has all the power in the universe, why didn't he do that? That's a good question. I believe the reason why God didn't do that is this. Satan was questioning God. Satan was arguing against God. He was spreading lies and rumors to the universe. Now, if God had have come along and just said, look, you're going against me, poof, and just got rid of his enemies, that would have put a lot of argument back into Satan's arguments, wouldn't it? The universe would have started to think, well, maybe Satan was right in the first place. Maybe God is unjust. It's a bit like our world today. If you have a political leader that arises, just say it's in our own country of Australia, and the opposition leader in Parliament starts to put the government down. We don't like your laws. We don't like your regulations. We don't like your policies. And if our Prime Minister stood up and said, please take the opposition leader out and execute him, that would add a lot of argument to the opposition leader's argument, wouldn't it? We would start to think, well, maybe the opposition leader is right. Maybe our Prime Minister is unfair, unjust. Maybe we don't want him as our leader and our government. And it was the same in heaven, friends. If Satan was just destroyed by God, it would have added to his argument that God was unfair, unjust. Satan needed to have time to show his true colours, to show the fruits of what his government would be like, to show the fruits of what the whole of the universe would become like if we would follow his laws, his rules and his regulations. So God allowed Satan to continue. He cast him out of heaven, and when he was cast out of heaven, he came down to this earth and he continued the war against God on this earth. Sadly, he deceived our first parents, Adam and Eve, into joining him in his rebellion. As a result, this world has been turned into chaos. Who is responsible then for the suffering that we see on this earth? Ultimately, Satan is the one who is responsible. He is the one that is deceiving mankind to break the law of God, to break the rules and regulations God's put in place for our safety and security. And that's why there's so much suffering in our world today. It's simply because mankind breaks God's 10 commandments. If I put this talk into a little nutshell, the reason why we are in so much sadness and suffering in this world is because we have been deceived into breaking God's law. Just think about it, friend. If the whole world simply kept God's simple 10 commandments, we would have a better world, wouldn't we? But for 6,000 years, Satan's been in controversy with God over his law. He wants us to be deceived into his rebellion and break the law of God. What we see in our world today is simply a result of breaking God's commandments. And the secret strategy of Satan right now, tonight, is to get you and I to break the commandments of God, to join him in his rebellion, to go onto his side, to follow his throne, his government, his laws, his rules, his regulations. And sadly, many people in our world have decided we're going to go Satan's way. He spread lies like freedom, do what thou wilt. You know, one of the famous Satanists of our era wrote the Satanic Bible. And the law of the Satanic Bible is basically this: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do whatever feels good, whatever tastes good. Doesn't matter what it is. If it satisfies your desires, that's the whole of the law. But God has put rules, regulations and restrictions in our life, not to make life difficult for us, but as boundaries to make us happy. The same way we put boundaries in our homes for our children. God has put boundaries on our lives because he knows when we go out of the boundaries, we find ourselves sorrowing, suffering in sin and sadness. But Satan's very cunning. Satan has spread lies not only through the world, but he has spread a lot of lies through the Christian church, because many Christians even today have been deceived by Satan's lies, Satan's sophistry, to believe that we don't need to worry about God's law anymore, that the commandments have been done away. Satan has 5 major lies, profound lies, that he spreads through the Christian church to deceive the people in the churches to believe they can break the law of God and it's okay. I want to go through those 5 particular lies right now. The first lie that Satan is spreading through the world is that Jesus did away with the 10 Commandment law. Have you heard that before, friends? When Jesus came down to this earth and died on the cross, he did away with the 10 Commandment law. Is that true? Friends, that is a lie of the devil. Jesus never did away with the law. Notice this verse in Matthew 5, verse 17. Jesus said, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." Here Jesus simply says, I have not come to destroy the law or the prophets. It's clear, isn't it? But he goes on and says this. Notice what it goes on in verse 19. It says, "Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven." Friend, if you are breaking God's commandments and you are teaching others it's okay to break those commandments, Jesus himself just said, you are the least in the kingdom of heaven. In other words, what he's saying is you're on Satan's side. He goes on in verse 19, continues, "But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Jesus, my friends, never did away with God's commandments. The 10 commandments are still there. Jesus didn't do away with them. In fact, Jesus kept the commandments. He magnified the law. He kept it holy. In fact, if Jesus did away with the 10 commandments, he actually did away with the definition of sin. You know, in the Christian world and even the world at large, we'll often hear that word sin. What is sin? It's one of those words we hear of the word sin and we always think, well, sin is something bad. But what is the definition of sin? The Bible is very, very clear of what the definition of sin is. In 1 John 3 verse 4, the Bible tells us, "Whosoever committeth sin transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression or breaking of the law." The definition of sin is the transgression or breaking of God's law. It's when you and I break the commandments of God, we are now classed as a sinner. Notice Romans 4 verse 15. It says, "For where no law is, there is no transgression." Now if Jesus came and he did away with the law of God, he's actually done away with the definition of sin. In other words, there's no such thing as sin anymore. In fact, if Jesus did away with the commandments, he did away with the need of himself. You see, friends, if there is no such thing as sin, if there's no law, there is no such thing as sin anymore. And if there's no such thing as sin, if there's no sin, well, there's no need of grace anymore, is there? And if there's no need of grace, well, friends, it's very clear that there's then no need of Jesus. Jesus didn't come to do away with the law, friends. He came, he magnified the law, he kept the law, and he told us that whosoever breaks these commandments and teaches others to do so, he's least in the kingdom of heaven. Another lie that Satan brings out is this one, lie number 2. Jesus gave us new commandments. He says when Jesus came, he did away with the 10 commandments, but he just gave us 2 commandments, new ones. Is that true, friends? Did Jesus give us new commandments? Let's find out about this. We find this misunderstanding really comes from the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22. In Matthew 22, we find Jesus teaching the people, and a particular man comes to Jesus and he says, "Which is the greatest commandment?" Which is the greatest commandment? Now notice what Jesus said, Matthew 22, verse 37 to 39. Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. People say, well, there's the new commandments. Jesus said, love God supremely and love your neighbour as yourself. Let's just love everybody. That's the commandment